hopefully. Very good evening to you, Mr. Wickramaratne.
Good evening.
I'm glad, by the way, to see you here after your 4 hours of questioning, because you raised some point or other. We'll talk about that in a minute. But tell us about the budget. Good, bad, mediocre, over-ambitious?
I think the biggest problem with the budget is that the numbers, the statistics, the data, and the financial data that is given is not accurate. I mean, there are good objectives in a budget statement, objectives in which the opposition also can agree. There are some objectives that you will disagree with, right? But ultimately, the budget is about getting things done and how much money can you actually allocate. You have to go beyond the story. And when people come to hear the budget speech, you're looking for the proposals, expenditure, but you're also looking for the revenue proposals of how you're actually going to do it. That was just absent in this budget. So it was a storyline, right? But I think most things will not get done.
In any case, historically, most times, whichever, forget the political hue, most times, in any case, one's lucky if about 1/3 of the promises are kept, or what is proposed. It's a proposal, and one is lucky if 1/3 gets done. Do you think that even 1/3 will get done here?
This time it's far more serious than that, and the main issue the government faces is a revenue problem. And in 2018, the revenue was 1.9 trillion rupees. Yeah. In 2019, it was just a little under 1.9 trillion rupees. In the budget, they said that the 2020 revenue will be 1.58 trillion rupees. My own estimation is that it won't even be 1.58 trillion. It will be probably 1.3 trillion rupees. Now, if you take the numbers they gave as a revenue for 2020 and you look at the numbers they gave for 2021, it says the revenue number will be 2 trillion, right? Yeah. Or if it's in billions, 2029 billion, right? So you take their numbers, the revenue increase has to be 28% on their numbers. Yeah. On my numbers, the revenue increase is 44%. Right. Okay. So we all know, if you look at a 20-year history of the Sri Lankan budget, normally the revenue increases will be 5, 10, 15% if you are lucky, which we managed to do. With an exceptional year, we got 20%. So this is actually not possible. So really the big issue in this budget is a revenue problem.
But aren't they proposing to widen the tax net, if you like, and the introduction of what appears to be a simpler system like the GST, the General Services Tax? Coupled with all of that, do you think it's at least remotely possible?
Not even remotely possible. The situation is more serious because a country's revenue is generally measured in terms of its GDP. So the Sri Lankan revenue presently is 9% of GDP, just 9% of GDP. So if you take a European country, it's 40 to 50+% of GDP. If you take countries in Asia, even if you take a country like Pakistan, it's 12%. Zambia is 18%, Egypt is 20%, right? And then you have even countries like Argentina at 24%, Mongolia at 27%, Ukraine at 37%, right? And Sri Lanka is at 9%. Now the highest Sri Lanka has been is around 1982, when we were 29% of GDP. When Chandrika Kumaratunga became president, we were over 22% of GDP, the revenue number. When Mahinda Rajapaksa vacated office and we took over, it was 11% of GDP. And we managed to bring it to 13.5 and again dropped to 12.6 in 2019. So the real issue Sri Lanka faces is a revenue issue.
And Eran, I know these are all numbers and figures and statistics and so on. But the public out there, our viewers, will be interested in knowing what it's going to be really like. Forget these percentages and all that. The common man really wants to know what's going to happen. Everyone, actually, it's just not the common man. I don't mean that in any low way, but what I'm saying is public concern is about the reality. What can you translate your concerns to reality?
I will explain it in reality what the situation is going to be. So if you take government salaries that government has to pay, it's vast public sector. If you take the pensions that government has to pay for the former people in the public sector, and if you take the financial costs, these are non-discretionary payments. Government has to pay them. Right? Just those three items would come to 1.9 trillion rupees.
The recurrent expenditure.
Just that expenditure only. Then that's without any development, and that's without any social protection.
Is that 1.9 billion without the interest cost?
It includes the interest cost.
So it's 1.2 plus 7.
Because it's non-discretionary. You have to pay that.
Right.
So my point is, it's 1.9 million just for that, without development, without social protection. But it's going to look more like 1.3 million this year. They claimed it's going to be more like 1.5, but I'm saying 1.3. Now here is the issue. The issue is we live in a society that there are people who are wealthy and prosperous, and then there are people who are vulnerable, and you have this in any society, and in Sri Lankan society it's quite a big issue. Apart from that, there's a new issue on vulnerability. It's not just the class issue of being poor and rich. It's also another issue, that is that you can be a middle class person, and through your life cycle, you can be prosperous at one point, you can have a job, you can have income, you can have savings, investments. But in the same life cycle, you can go through a vulnerable patch. COVID-19 is showing that people in the middle class who had incomes, who had savings, are also struggling because they are going through a vulnerable patch now. Right? So my point is this budget, has no space to take care of the vulnerable, and none of the proposals really in this budget really address that issue. That is why I'm saying that the situation is far more serious than people actually think. Stories won't help at this time. Actually, people need answers. If you have a job, you are lucky to keep it, because many people have been laid off, particularly in 2020. People who have permanent jobs, their incomes sometimes have been cut, or their bonuses and the ex gratia payments are not being given, so payments have come down. Lots of people in our community work on a day-to-day basis, from the person who comes to maybe pluck coconuts to the domestic in the homes that are there, some of the staff who come into our offices, who are doing daily routine jobs, not permanent employment. And there's a large millions of people in this economy. Those people are finding it extremely difficult. And with the coronavirus, sometimes you don't want them to come as well, which also makes a social problem. So people are going through a very difficult period, and this budget does not address that situation.
And on a practical note, Mr. Wickramaratne, how, as a patriotic citizen of the country, and leaving politics aside, how do you intend playing a role to assist the government, because as the President said in his speech, everybody must work. I don't know, I think what he meant is everyone must band together. How do you intend, in your way, as Eran Wickramaratne, citizen Sri Lanka, what's the role you're going to do?
I think if you want to get to a destination, you have to first travel on the right road. And I think I have a personally responsibility in actually pointing that the road that they are traveling is not the right road. They have a revenue problem. That's what I have been explaining. Then they come up with things.
What should they do to increase revenue?
I will say that. Then they come up with things like we can do expenditure cuts and so forth and so on. That's not really going to yield anything, because as I showed, non-discretionary payments alone cannot be met. So what are we really doing then? We are funding our development, we are funding our social protection on borrowings. More and more borrowings are being taken. So when revenue drops, even more borrowings have to be taken, which means that we are getting into a deeper hole than we actually think. So the first thing is we need to get on the right track. You need to recognize the real issue. If you recognize the issue as I'm explaining it, then you can start addressing it. So in a situation like that, right, you have to go in for a program of fiscal consolidation. You have to get your revenues up. Your revenues have to go up from 9%, it has to go further up.
Yeah.
Right? So the government, right, has to actually address that situation. Without addressing that situation, they cannot come out of it. Then, if the government addresses that situation, and if the government has a playing field,
Yeah.
right, which is acceptable, right, then the international community, the multilaterals, the investors, we look at Sri Lanka favorably, right? We look at it favorably. In the present context, I can't see that even happening, you see.
The government admit that the budget deficit is about 11% and so on. And they've sort of got tailor-made solutions. If you look at it, you know, people laughed at the beginning, but you know, you have a state minister for Batik, and they've gone down to very detailed, sort of, it's almost tailor-made. And then couple that with the 6 industrial parks which they are talking about, hopefully maybe out of the Western Province, and to spread it out a bit. And also the 10 technically savvy universities, new ones that they're proposing. With all these, don't you think that eventually our revenue will go up? Maybe not in a day, but...
Yeah, the situation is immediate. So you have a short-term issue.
So what is your solution for a quick win?
Yeah, so the short-term issue and the long-term issue. So the government has chosen a path of looking inward. Our solution would be is don't do that, look outward. I'll give you one example, right? The government says, okay, what are we going to do? We are going to like ban certain imports, right? This is one of the things. I'm using an example. But don't they realize that we are a country which has been trading for centuries, and we are a party to the World Trade Organization, the WTO. If we go down this path, right, we are threatening our exports if we go down that path. So the government's way of doing it is not going to bring the desired result. And we need to remember, our main export markets are the US and Europe, and then for some products the Middle East. And therefore, every country, if it takes the attitude we take, and they say we are not going to really import things from other countries and we are only going to look at our market,
But surely these measures that the government have proposed are short-termist, not medium or long-term.
Okay, they have done it in 2020, and now they have extended it into full year 2021.
Yeah.
That this has been extended to. So, what is going to happen, right?
What's the alternative, though?
That's why I said my view is that you shouldn't go this route of having it in a closed economy. Our future, even in the short term, is to keep our economy open, right? And for us to strengthen and compete, and for us to export, that's where the emphasis should be, right? Just looking at it internally will not really help us. So there is, if you want, really a economic philosophical divide at the moment between what the government is doing and what people like I am thinking. And I think therefore they should open it out. Certainly, right, where there are comparative advantages, right, when it comes to local manufacturing, government should provide them with support. Provide the support there, right, because there is a comparative advantage. It's fully worth providing the support there. But if you take a blanket view, right, that you are going to be more inward looking, our markets are not big enough for us to create the prosperity that we actually need.
Let's look at the alternatives after this short break. Don't go away. After all, this is Newsline Live. We'll be back with Eran Wickramaratne very shortly.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Mr. Eran Wickramaratne, Member of Parliament from the SJB. European countries are criticizing the ban on imports as this is not, they say, the way to do trade, and trade is two-way. That is obviously your view. You were just talking about that. How does one, I mean, they've given us a veiled sort of little reminder, not too strong. What does the government do about that? How does that kind of message translate to operation matters?
Yeah, so if you look at it practically, right, if other countries also take the same policy stand that our country is taking, we'll all be worse off. We'll all be worse off. It's just logically you become worse off. So therefore you need to be open for trade. Strengthen the areas in which you have a competitive advantage. Put your subsidies in that area. That's one. Then if you look at it, take for example the port. Right? What do you need a port for? You need a port for trading, right? And our advantage is geographical location, right? And we must ensure that places like our port work efficiently. SAGT was always ranked as extremely efficient terminal.
Yeah.
Then CICT was ranked as an extremely efficient terminal by global standards. And then we have our own terminal. Those are the things we should focus on. Keep its efficiency going, because here is a great opportunity. If you don't, you know what could happen? Right, we could lose the trade coming through the Colombo port. If major shipping lines decide to pull out, it's going to be years before we can bring them in. Therefore, we should focus on where we could actually have an advantage. And trade and logistics is one area.
Now, we're talking about the port. I mean, successive governments, again, devoid of political hue, have hardly done anything to make the port operations lean and mean. They I think, employ over 15,000 people, and as you say, the privately run side of things is far more efficient. And none of the governments who've been in power have done really anything other than increase the. It seems to be a favorite place to place your political supporters and give them jobs.
Yeah, I wouldn't completely agree with what you said, because I think going back a long time when I was a student, right, Lalit Athulat Mudali, as shipping minister, was the first significant person in the area of shipping and trade who actually pushed Sri Lanka a lot more into the international circle. Then after that, under Chandrika Kumaranatunga, they created a terminal and they gave it to the shipping companies, and later SAGT and the John Cales and all were involved in it, and a very efficient terminal. Then under President Mahinda Rajapaksa, they created CICT, which was a Chinese-owned terminal, which also works very efficiently. So I think your reference relates more to the government-owned terminal and its efficiency.
Yeah.
And I think your criticism there is fair, because if you take it and compare it with the other terminals, obviously the number...
There is no comparison.
Yes, there is no comparison. But that leads to a broader issue, Shaukat. It's not just about the terminal there. It's not just about that. That leads to the broader issue about government in business and how can we make government more efficient in business. In fact, in the budget speech, right, the finance minister specifically identified the problem on state-owned enterprises and said that we are never going to privatize state-owned enterprises. He actually has said that in his speech. right? But we are going to make them more efficient, and we are going to commercialize them, and we are going to bring new laws to do it. And there is something to that effect in his statement. I looked at that and I thought to myself, again, it's the road you take. If something is strategically important, then governments must own it, and I agree with that. But if it is not strategically important, right, what are we going to do? Shouldn't we put it in the hands of the private sector in this country, who can run things efficiently?
But here, this is the ideological problem, because this government is of the ideology that you don't sell the family silver. But then that raises the question, surely that government has no business being in business. They must facilitate business, but not really be in business.
Yeah, so Shaukat, I would say it like this. Can you actually call a company family silver when you take its net asset value as negative? I'm now in opposition, so I don't have to provide all the answers, but I can ask all the questions, right? What is the government going to do with Sri Lankan Airlines? What is the government going to do with the huge losses in the Ceylon electricity board?
I think the Sri Lankan Airlines is a bit of a, they ought to be prosecuting all those people who were on the fiddle. You know, that's a simple question.
Certainly, corruption, wherever it is, raises its head, must be dealt with through the judicial process, and I'm in agreement with that. But I'm talking about the commercial viability of state-owned enterprises. That's not the only one, right? Lots of commercial enterprises. So now we can take the view like this. We can take the view in a government that water supply is strategic. Supply of electricity is strategic, and therefore government must have ownership of these services. A strategic decision is made, and there may be some others like that you can make a strategic decision. But then we have hundreds and hundreds of other state-owned enterprises. Government needs to ask the question, are those strategic enterprises or not? And if they are not strategic enterprises, is it fair by the vulnerable people in this country, the poor in this country, is it fair by them, that taxpayers' money, poor people also paying taxes, that their money is being put to fund those? These are the questions that the budget did not address, even though it identified the problem.
But do you think that just as much as the previous government didn't do much about this, that this government will have any further incentive? After all, they have a virtual 2/3 majority. The president has got his votes. If there was any incentive, it should have been in the last government, because it would have worked in their favor. So at the end of the day, it appears to me that the people of this country are going to continue to suffer, and opportunities are going to be even further limited.
Every time we try to bring a reform, Shaukat, what did they do? They put people on the street. They struck work every time we try to do a reform. It is even from, introducing the ambulance system 1990, right, which my colleague Harsha championed, right, starting with that, right? Even from that, including that, right, and then lots of other things that we wanted to do, right, in the education sector, in the health sector, right? What did they do? They told people to actually oppose it. I'm saying the reverse. You have a president. We never had a president. The UNP hasn't had a president in 30 years, right? We didn't have a president. This government has the presidency. This government has a 2/3 majority. This government has no excuses for what it is doing. And I must say that this president has no excuses too, because after he brought in the 20th Amendment and he took more executive power, then only he can be held responsible. So this government can do it. because it has the political support in Parliament to take the difficult decisions. My question is this: you need to take the difficult questions, but you need to be on the right track, because if you are not on the right track, you will go to the wrong destination.
And you, as citizen Wickramaratne, will assist this government in any way that a good citizen can.
If they take the right decision, certainly, I said that this morning in Parliament while I was speaking, I said if they take the right decision on state-owned enterprises, the opposition will be helping them, because we are concerned about the vulnerable people in this country, right? We want everybody to have a better chance, right? And therefore, there is a social contract between those who govern and those who are governed. In that social contract, right, in that social contract, Shaukat, right, we have to take care of those people, right, in meeting that social contract. Therefore, when we put tax money, we need to make sure we are putting the tax money to take care of the whole population. It is so very important. Shaukat, we have been born in this country.
Yeah.
And our journey will end in this country. It may be through burial or it may be through cremation. But if you are not a dual citizen,
yeah,
if you are a dual citizen, when things get tough, you can disappear to another country. We don't have that option. That is why even this morning in Parliament I argued strongly, we can't keep this in the hands of dual citizens. We must make the decisions for our people, and we must make sure that while we are pursuing prosperity, that we take care of the vulnerable.
Eran Wickramaratne, thank you very much for being on Newsline Live. Take care, have a wonderful evening ahead of you, and it's time now for the primetime news from News First, the only channel really worth watching. Take care, and as always, God bless.